So many of you might be wondering why I'm releasing my first Black History Month video so late in February. Well, the answer is actually pretty simple. I'm mixed, so legally speaking I can only celebrate half of Black History Month. Sorry guys, I didn't make the rules here. This is just how it is. Hey everyone, I'm Ben, your underground conductor, and welcome to Underground Cinema. This week's video is actually the first in my Black History Month series. So from now until the end of February, I'll be covering films that I feel are vital to the overall artistic identity of Black Americans. How many films will I cover, you might ask? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we're already halfway through the month at this point, so realistically speaking, I probably can't release more than 2 or 3 videos counting this one. Like, obviously there's films that I want to cover for this month, but content creation is, like, really time-consuming, guys. And it actually has been the case on this channel that there are films that I had planned to review previously, but I ended up skipping them to prioritize other films. Because as much as I'd like to cover them, realistically speaking, there's only so much time I can spend editing. And also sometimes I just lose interest in doing a review, not because I dislike the film I had planned to talk about, but because I don't really feel like I can add anything substantive in terms of critique or discussion. However, that is certainly not the case with this week's film. In addition to being Black History Month, the week I'm recording this is also the week of Valentine's Day, and what better way to celebrate the holiday than talking about one of my favorite romance films, Love and Basketball. Now, prior to my rewatch for the review, I'd actually only seen this film once before, about 4 or 5 years ago. But despite only seeing it once, I already thought it was amazing, and it easily fit into my top 3 for romance films. And sitting down to watch this film again, it really blew me away. Like, obviously this is me forecasting the review a bit, but I think this film is amazing. And I don't care how this makes me sound, I actually cried rewatching it, just because of how emotionally moving it is. This is just such a great movie, and there's so many specific details that I want to discuss with it that I'm actually anxious, because I feel like there's just so much to dig into. That being said, before I dig into the movie, there is actually something interesting that I'd like to bring up, and I did not realize this until I actually went back through my catalog of videos to see the reviews I'd already done. Turns out, Love and Basketball is the first movie I will review that is actually in the Criterion Collection. For those of you who do not know, the Criterion Collection is a worldwide film organization that dedicates themselves to preserving, restoring, selling, and streaming films from around the world. However, what makes Criterion interesting is that they only catalog films that they consider to be artistically valuable. Typically films that bear some sort of historical, political, or cultural significance to whatever country they were made in. And obviously, since I am a physical media collector, I actually do own my fair share of Criterion releases. Some of the films that I own from Criterion include The Passion of Joan of Arc from Carl Theodor Dreyer, M from Fritz Lang, and Chasing Amy from Kevin Smith. Actual Criterion, look it up. I also own a few of Criterion's box sets, like the Before trilogy from Richard Linklater, the BRD trilogy from Werner Fassbinder, and the 4-film samurai collection from Akira Kurosawa. However, out of all the Criterions that I own, one that I do not actually have is Love and Basketball. And the reason I don't own it is very simple. I did not know that Love and Basketball was in the Criterion Collection until near the end of last year. The film itself was only added to Criterion relatively recently in like 2021, so that being said, I don't really mind not owning the Criterion because I already own the film on Blu-ray, and I don't imagine the Criterion would have that many more special features than this. Plus, this Blu-ray was only $6. I got it at Big Lots. Meanwhile, the Criterion for Love and Basketball is like 30 or 40 bucks. What can be said? Criterions are pricey. That's why I buy most of mine secondhand. Anyway, as mentioned, Criterion tends to only catalog films that they consider to be of a certain artistic value. But every now and then they add a film to their collection that's a head-scratcher. Like they'll have films in their collection like Lady Snowblood, which is sort of like a late-era Ronin-style revenge story about a female assassin. It's a film that was very unique in the era that it was made, and is incredibly striking both visually and aesthetically. So much so that Lady Snowblood actually directly inspired Quentin Tarantino when he was making the Kill Bill movies. So it makes perfect sense why Criterion would catalog a movie like that. But then you have other things in the Criterion library, like Armageddon. And to be clear, I actually like Armageddon. I think it's Michael Bay's most underrated film. I think that the film is actually incredibly suspenseful and carries a lot of emotional weight and impact. No pun intended. But, yeah, those films are not the same. So every now and then, Criterion will release a movie that just makes you say, what the That being said, Love and Basketball is absolutely not one of those movies. Not only does Love and Basketball deserve to be in the Criterion collection, but quite frankly, it's actually insulting that it took over 20 years for it to be added to begin with. I cannot stress enough how good Love and Basketball is as a film. And the director, Gina Prince-Bythewood, put so much care and attention in the script when she wrote it. So much of this film just feels so natural and organic, and yet at the same time is so carefully thought out and constructed. Like, legitimately, the only movie I can think of off the top of my head that feels more authentic than Love and Basketball is 8 Mile. That's how real this movie is. And the two themes that contribute the most to that authenticity and realness is the two central focuses of the film: love and basketball. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is that the movie is completely tied to those two concepts and blends them together so well to a point that the movie is actually broken up into quarters like a basketball game. The plot of the film essentially follows the growing romance between two kids, being Quincy and Monica, as they both grow up as next-door neighbors. As we begin our film, we enter the first quarter, in 1981. When the film begins, we actually see the initial meeting between the two characters as Monica's family is moving in next to Quincy's. And the core dynamic between these characters is established simultaneously with the characters' personalities themselves. Quincy is a tough kid who doesn't respect girls because he doesn't think that they belong on the court, and he sees himself as the best possible player he could be because his father happens to be a player for the Clippers, as well as being the All-State spokesman. Meanwhile, Monica plays the underdog role as a tomboy who's just trying to prove herself constantly to everyone in her life. Not just to kids like Quincy, but to her parents as well, particularly her mother. It's actually quite funny. Monica as a tomboy is in a very similar vein to like Scout from To Kill a Mockingbird. She even hates wearing dresses like Scout does. Anyway, after the kids first meet, Monica challenges Quincy and his friends to a basketball game that she's actually doing pretty well at. But Quincy, determined not to lose the game, decides to push Monica, which results in her getting a cut on her face as she falls to the ground. The cut ends up scarring, and she carries that scar around with her for the rest of her life, as a constant reminder of Quincy. Quincy obviously feels guilty about this, so he and his mother actually end up going next door to greet Monica's family as they're moving in, and Quincy even draws a nice "I'm sorry" card for Monica. The two kids then get to know each other more, they then try to one-up each other, and both of them express their similar yet parallel desires of getting involved in professional basketball. Obviously, as mentioned, Quincy's father is a basketball player, as well as being the All-State spokesman. And Quincy wants to follow in his father's footsteps. He even wants to be the same number as his dad, 22. Meanwhile, Monica, as the black sheep of her family, wants to be the first female player in the NBA. And she wants to be number 32, like Magic Johnson. These kids, sharing their respective goals with each other, helps them to bond. And obviously, following that point, intrigue begins to build. As shortly after, the 11-year-old Quincy asks the 11-year-old Monica if she wants to be his girlfriend. She agrees, the two of them kiss, it's all very cute, and then they break up immediately over stubbornness, because of course they do. We then fast forward 7 years to the second quarter. The year is 1988, and Quincy and Monica are both in their final year of high school. Both of them play on the basketball teams for their school. Quincy plays on the boys' team, Monica plays on the girls' team, and both of them carry the respective numbers that they said they want to carry. 22 and 32. And as we follow these characters in their teen years, we get to see how they've evolved, but also how in many ways they're still the same stubborn kids that they were earlier. Quincy is still a very proud young man. He thinks he's God's gift to the world. He sees himself as destined to follow in his father's footsteps. The only thing that's really changed with him is that he's become a player, not only on the court, but in the bedroom. Meanwhile, Monica is still a tomboy, still stubborn, but is also incredibly anxious and fearful for her future, which is sort of a natural evolution of her underdog complex, the fact that she thinks that she has to fight against everyone to prove herself. And interestingly enough, Monica is actually in a similar position to Quincy, in the sense that both of them are getting scouted out. For Quincy, it's pretty much a sure thing, not only because his father's a basketball player, but because Quincy is so naturally talented and makes basketball look effortless. Meanwhile, while Monica works hard, she's ultimately brought down by her temper. And the ironic thing is that the more frustrated she gets, the more anxious she gets that she won't get picked by a talent scout, and that anxiety feeds back into her frustration. It just goes back and forth. Nevertheless, a sense of comfort that she retains in her life is actually Quincy. While the two of them maintain a sense of rivalry in their adolescent years, it's also very clear that they're basically best friends. When Monica needs a ride home from her game, she knows that she can go to Quincy. And while Quincy's a bit of a dickhead, he gives her a ride anyway. In this car ride, you see the two of them argue and point out each other's flaws, but the criticism never feels mean-spirited from either of them. It always feels like it's coming from a place of genuine care, even if the two of them are too cool to admit it. Monica tries to warn Quincy about the fact that he should watch out for loose girls, and tells him that you shouldn't go for a girl that tries to mail you her coochie through the mail. I'll let you guys digest that for a second. Meanwhile, Quincy tells Monica that she should do her best to keep a cool head because it's obviously hurting her chances with the talent scouts. Obviously, both of them push back against what the other person says, but it's very clear that they're still listening to each other, and what they're telling each other stays with them as individuals. We also get to see in other subtle ways how the two of them see each other as the only people that they can depend on. That night that Quincy gives Monica a ride home, Quincy's parents start arguing over nonsense. And once Quincy starts hearing it, obviously it's bothering him, so what he does is just go out his window and then knock on Monica's window. And without saying a word, Monica just lets him in and gives him a pillow. And he just sleeps on the floor next to her bed. And this scene is so ingenious in the way it's directed and presented. The fact that there's no dialogue, and that the characters are just doing this for each other. It communicates that not only are they close friends, but it also shows that this is not the first time Quincy has done this. The fact that there's no questions asked, the fact that Monica just hands him a pillow, it shows that they've been through this routine before and that they have an implicit trust with each other. Not only that, but they support each other. And we see that in the championship game that Monica is so stressed about. While the game doesn't go exactly the way she wants it to, and while she ends up receiving a holding violation that really stresses her out, we can see that there are people in the stands who are still cheering her on and there to show their support, like Quincy, who we see is sitting in the bleachers but not saying a word. Like, Quincy didn't have to show up to that game at all, and he didn't have to stay the entire time. Monica's sister Lena didn't even stay the entire time. She left at halftime to study. But Quincy does, because he supports his best friend. After this championship game, the big spring dance comes up, and Monica and Quincy both go on separate dates to the dance. And it's actually funny because this school dance scene is actually how I initially discovered this film. I'm a big fan of music, and typically the way I discover a lot of the songs that I love is through movies that I watch. But Love and Basketball is one of the rare situations where the opposite was true. Years ago, I was just scrolling through Instagram and I saw the school dance scene pop up to the song Just Got Paid by Johnny Kemp, which is one of my favorite songs now. And the moment I saw the scene, I immediately went to track down the film, and that's how I ended up watching it for the first time. And I'll tell you, the scenes at the school dance do a great job selling the film. Not just because of the song choices during these sequences, but also because of what is communicated both verbally and non-verbally in the scenes. When Monica shows up at the dance with her dress and with makeup, she immediately turns heads, including Quincy's. And Quincy immediately ignores his date and goes up to compliment Monica. You know, it's sort of like that 80s movie trope about how the newly transformed tomboy supersedes the long-standing hotness of a popular girl. You know what I'm talking about. But still, intrigue is established between both characters, and as the school dance goes on, we see both Quincy and Monica dancing with their respective dates to the song I Just Want to Be Your Man. Meanwhile, the two of them, while dancing with other people, are just looking into each other's eyes, longingly. Just like so many other things in this film, that sequence is just so purposeful, and it does great work to strengthen the bond between both of these characters. Later that night, after the school dance ends, Monica and Quincy meet back up, and it turns out, despite having the opportunity, neither of them slept with their respective dates. Despite being a hot college guy, Monica just wasn't feeling things with her date, and she didn't appreciate the fact that he was just feeling her up the whole time after the dance. Meanwhile, Quincy, for once, ended up thinking with his big head rather than his little one, and chose to drive his date home directly after the dance, despite the fact that she was literally offering herself to him. Now, we as the audience can understand, based on these unfolding discoveries, that these characters are just inching closer and closer to each other. But the final push for both of them is the discovery that they're both going to the same college. Following all of her fear and anxiety, Monica ends up finding a USC letter addressed to her after the school dance. She has Quincy read it to her, and it's revealed that she has been recruited. And in this moment, Quincy reveals to her that he has also been recruited to USC. The two of them congratulate each other, but there's a sudden, unexpected kiss between the two of them. And while the kiss is certainly awkward, it doesn't feel wrong. Monica and Quincy end up spending the night together, and while it's never explicitly told to us, the way the scene is directed, it makes it perfectly clear that this is the night that Monica loses her virginity. And even though up until this point Quincy as a character has been established to be a player, it's clear that he is not taking advantage of her or the situation. He's being as considerate and thoughtful as he can be. And the guy even brought a condom with him. If that isn't considerate, I don't know what is. Everything about this sex scene between Quincy and Monica feels so real. It feels so naturally built up to and earned, and the characters have so much chemistry with each other. You can feel a genuine tenderness between the actors. Sana Lathan and Omar Epps feel like they genuinely care for each other in every single scene in this film. They have such a natural rapport that almost feels ad-libbed. And if you have ever been in love, you can feel the raw emotion coming from the scenes with them. You can feel every single moment of heartache, pain, compassion, excitement, the awkward joy that you just feel by having this person around. The sweetness that you can almost taste when they're supporting you in your hard times, and the bitterness that you have to swallow when you have to come and help them through theirs. Like, if I didn't know that this was a movie, I would have just assumed that they picked up a random couple from the street and said, "Hey, you want to play basketball and argue with each other on camera?" And the great thing about the catharsis from these two finally coming together is that it doesn't end there. We move on to the following school semester in quarter 3. Both Monica and Quincy have begun their freshman year at USC. And as we follow them through their new lives in college, we not only get to see how their talent grows as basketball players, but we also get to see how their relationship grows and develops and how they develop as people now that they're out on their own. While Quincy is still boastful, proud, and charismatic, he's done being a player. Like, we see a scene of Quincy being friendly with a couple girls who watched his last game, and obviously Monica gets upset because she's there for the interaction. But Quincy takes her to the ground and quickly reassures her that regardless of all these girls, Monica is the only one who will ever keep it real with him. And Monica just replies in that moment, "I love you too." Which shows how far their relationship has developed. The fact that Quincy can make a metaphor like that, and Monica just immediately understands it as an "I love you." And the fact that Quincy is willing to say this also shows how he has grown as an individual. Meanwhile, Monica is still dealing with her same old struggles, trying to prove herself, this time in a college environment. But instead of negging her or telling her that she has an attitude problem, when Monica vents to Quincy, Quincy just tells her to prove them wrong. And yeah, he teases her a bit, but there's never a moment where it feels like he's being harsh. It's only encouragement. And he even challenges her to a 1v1 in his dorm to help her practice. Of course, that 1v1 is just an excuse to get her clothes off so they can bone. But, you know, there's worse games to play than strip basketball. After this 1v1, we get a montage that juxtaposes the perspectives of Monica with Quincy. Quincy is obviously dominating on the court. He's essentially carrying the team that he's on. And as the montage ends, we get to see him walk off the court with his father, who's very clearly proud of him. You know, it's so nice to see that amidst his very busy career as an all-state spokesman, that Quincy's dad is still willing to make the time for him. Meanwhile, we get to see Monica struggling, practicing, doing her best to prove that she was worth the recruitment. And you know, the juxtaposition between these two characters in this montage once again goes to show how there is kind of an imbalance in their dynamic as individuals. The fact that it seems like everything has always just kind of been handed to Quincy on a silver platter, meanwhile Monica has always had to work for her accomplishments and her successes. Of course, as we approach the midpoint of this film, this dynamic shifts drastically. Quincy's father confesses to him that there's a woman currently out there who is claiming that her child is the son of Quincy's dad. Quincy asks his father if these accusations are true, and Quincy's dad reassures him that no, none of this is true. However, Quincy then goes to see his mother, and his mother reveals to him that she hired a PI to watch his father, and the PI ended up catching his father in an affair. This realization completely rocks Quincy's worldview, as his entire life he's looked up to his father not only as a sports role model, but as a moral one. His entire life, Quincy's father has told him to stand up straight, make sure to always look a man in the eye. His father even told him to never use the word can't, because can't shouldn't exist in a man's vocabulary. But despite all of this moral grandstanding, Quincy's dad still lied to his face. And Quincy has built his entire identity up until this point to be like his father. So what does that make him? Quincy begins to spiral, and as a result, he begins to feel like Monica is neglecting him. Which is not true. Monica is actually a pretty good girlfriend. However, Monica's focus has been more aimed toward the game lately because she wants to prove that she's worth being on the team. And there's a distinctive breaking point between the two characters where Monica tells Quincy that she has to go back to her dorm because her coach gave her a curfew. Meanwhile, Quincy doesn't really know exactly what he wants. He wants Monica to be there to comfort him, but he doesn't really feel like walking around or being with other people. And following this, we receive a second montage showing the sudden and immediate shift between Quincy's playstyle in the game and Monica's playstyle in the game. Monica's practice and dedication is finally materializing into something real, as she is single-handedly responsible for her team winning their championship game. Meanwhile, Quincy, who was carrying his team, ends up losing the game for them. We then get to see the aftermath of how this affected the both of them, as Monica and Quincy seem to meet up at a frat party. Monica is enjoying herself dancing, celebrating this win that she just got, and the fact that her coach moved her up to the starting position as a reward. Meanwhile, Quincy shows up to the party already plastered, acting completely inconsiderate, and even overtly flirting with another girl near the keg stand. Monica confronts him about this, but obviously Quincy just blows it off. He then goes back to his dorm and runs into his father. And his father tries to smooth things over, apologize for lying, reassures him that yes, while he did cheat, he's not the father of that girl's child. But none of that matters to Quincy. He still feels betrayed, and he tells his father in this moment that he's going to drop out of school and just go pro for the NBA. His father objects to this and tells Quincy that he can't do this, but Quincy doesn't care. And all he says is, I thought can't wasn't in a man's vocabulary. The next morning, Monica goes to see Quincy if he's feeling any better, and she sees that Quincy is taking another girl out on a date. They then meet up later that night, and Quincy makes it perfectly clear that the only reason he took that girl out was to get Monica's attention because he's felt neglected lately and that she hasn't been there for him. It's an overtly shitty thing that he did. There's really no way to excuse that kind of behavior in a relationship. But there's a certain level of leeway that Quincy is afforded by us, the viewer, since we have seen that within the span of a week, his entire world has fallen apart. And Monica, as one of the characters in the story, understands what's happened here, and just asks how she can fix this. And Quincy tells her that he's just going through way too much right now and needs to move on. He essentially discards the woman that he loves because he has no idea what to do with his life right now. And following this breakup, we arrive at the fourth and final quarter of the film. 5 years later, we see that after college, Monica has gotten involved in international basketball. She's moved to Spain, she's been there for 7 months, and she's been essentially carrying the team that she's on. While she's there, though, she runs into Sidra, who used to play on her team in college. Monica actually ended up taking her position after that big win that she had. The two girls meet up for dinner. Apparently Sidra's been playing in Italy while Monica's been playing in Spain. And meeting up with Sidra and talking with her and seeing how Sidra has experienced life outside of America compared to Monica, it's made Monica realize that she doesn't enjoy basketball anymore. That even though she's been there for 7 months, she hasn't really made any friends, her family's not there with her, and her phone bill is enormous. So she wants a change. Meanwhile, we pivot to Quincy, who we see has actually grown a full Van Dyke, like his father, and is currently playing for the Lakers. Apparently, since he's dropped out, he's just been getting traded from team to team. And while he's still a good player, nothing's really been a real fit for him. And if things weren't already bad enough for him, we see that in his last game, he actually tears his ACL, which is an extremely vital ligament that connects the thigh muscles to the shin muscles through the knee. This injury has obviously put him out of commission, and while he's in the hospital, we see that his father comes to visit him. Quincy obviously hasn't seen his father in 5 years, and he's not interested in hearing what he has to say, but Quincy's father tells him, "Listen, son, you're smart, you're talented, you're better than anyone on the court, but you're also more than that. You have opportunities to do so many other things." And Quincy just says to his father, "Why couldn't you be the man that you always tried to get me to be?" And Quincy's father doesn't really have a real answer. His father just says, "I just couldn't, son. I just couldn't." Just very emotional sequence from both of them. However, following this very sad reunion, we actually get a much more uplifting one the following day. As it turns out, Monica has heard about Quincy's injury, and she comes to see him. She even brings him flowers, which is a very interesting character choice from her part, because she hates flowers. We find that out early in the film during the first quarter. So it's actually incredibly interesting that despite hating flowers and never wanting to receive them herself, she's gone out of her way to get them for someone else who's having a hard time. It's not only thoughtful, but also generous in the way that it goes against her character. It's incredibly intriguing, and they don't even draw attention to that fact. Just another subtly directed detail that makes the movie all the better. Anyway, Monica and Quincy are very happy to see each other, obviously, but then Quincy's girlfriend walks in. Awkward situation, obviously, but to make it even more awkward, we find out that Quincy is actually marrying this girl Kira, and their wedding is coming up very soon. It's right around the corner. Monica, receiving these two bombshells at the same time, chooses to leave. She then goes home and has a conversation with her mother. And during this conversation, Monica criticizes her mother for never being a good role model for her, for never standing up for herself, for resigning herself to a life of domesticity. You know, Monica was always a tomboy, and coming into adulthood, she really saw herself as a strong, independent black woman, but she never saw her mother as that. Of course, her mother claps back and says, "You've always looked down on me. You act like I'm trapped in the role of housewife when this was the life that I chose, to support you, your sister, and your father. Did I have dreams? Yes. But I was more than willing to put those dreams on the back burner for the sake of raising a family." The argument then evolves into how Monica feels like her mother was never really there for her, how her mother never really supported her. Monica's mother tells her that you never really needed me for those things. You had your dad, you had your coaches. Why would it matter if I was there? And Monica says it mattered. It mattered to me. You know, just a really interesting conflict coming really late in the narrative, but still feeling like it's naturally built up to based on the relationship we see between these characters early on in the film. Anywho, we receive another montage showing the now evolving adult lives of Monica and Quincy. Monica has lost interest in basketball. She's decided to go into banking with her father. Meanwhile, Quincy, who is healing from knee surgery, is training to see if he can get back in the game, as well as preparing for his upcoming wedding to Kira. Quincy ends up going home 2 weeks before his wedding to be with his mother. He runs into Monica and reveals to her that he doesn't really feel like he's into basketball anymore either. The interaction between the two of them is awkward, but it's also very civil, yet somber at the same time, as it seems like both of them are just lost in life at this point. Monica then talks to her mother again, and her mother tells her, "Monica, when I said that I thought Quincy could do better than that girl, I was talking about you." That night, Monica goes to Quincy's window the way he used to go to hers. He knocks on it and says, "Hey, listen, I've been in love with you since I was 11 years old, and this shit ain't going away. So, what we gotta do about this?" Quincy is obviously flabbergasted and says you don't do this kind of shit to someone 2 weeks before their wedding. Which, yeah, that's fair. But Monica says, "Hey, listen, I think you're making a big mistake, and I don't think that marrying this girl would be a good decision for you. So here's what we're gonna do. I'm challenging you to a 1v1, like we used to do. Quincy says, okay, what's at stake here? And Monica says, your heart. Last time we played a 1v1, you told me that you let me win. So I figure, if I win, that means you've realized that you're making a mistake. And Quincy says, okay, then what happens when I win? And Monica says, well, if you win, then I'll buy you a wedding present. So Monica and Quincy play a 1v1. First player to hit 5 shots wins. And it's actually kind of funny because I'm pretty sure that this 1v1 takes place over the course of like 2 to 3 minutes. And considering that we're in the 4th quarter of the film, it's actually quite fitting to have this final 1v1 here, because as everyone knows, the last 2 minutes are the only real competitive parts of any professional basketball game. So Monica and Quincy play, Quincy obviously still recovering from a knee injury, and Monica makes the first 3 shots. Of course, Quincy at this point is like, okay, I'm not playing no more. He takes off his leg brace and he proceeds to make 5 shots in a row, essentially destroying Monica. Monica is obviously upset by this because what this implicitly means is that Quincy doesn't love her. That's the assumption. But as Monica's walking away, Quincy says to her, hey, you want to play double or nothing? And the fact that these characters know each other so well, Monica immediately understands in that moment, oh no, this man does love me. And they kiss passionately as an expression of that love. We then pivot to the future and find ourselves in a basketball court. We see Magic Johnson's jersey on the wall, number 32. And then the camera pivots down to reveal to us Monica. As Monica gets up, we not only see that she is now number 32 for her team in the WNBA, but that her last name is now hyphenated. Her maiden name is Monica Wright, but her jersey reads Wright McCall, and McCall is Quincy's last name. And we see sitting at courtside is Quincy. He no longer has his Van Dyke, he now has a mustache, which I think is supposed to be a visual indication that he has finally grown past the trauma of his father lying and his parents breaking up. And we see him sitting there with a little girl, and this little girl is his and Monica's daughter. He tells her to wave at mommy, cheer for mommy in the game. And that is where we depart from the story. After all the twists and turns, the ups and downs, the complexity of life, we finally see that these two people who love each other, who grew up together, have finally had their happy ending. And there's even a little after-credit scene showing that the legacy will live on, because we see that their daughter is like playing like toddler basketball, which is adorable. But what can be said about love and basketball that I haven't said already? This movie is almost perfect. There's certain things left out that I would have liked to see, like for instance the reaction of Kira after hearing that Quincy was breaking off the engagement with her, but we don't need to see that. The focus of this film is exactly where it is meant to be. The purpose of this story is to show us the growing and complex relationship between people as they grow and change, as different things in life become harder and easier, as their interests shift, as their priorities change, as they come to realize that while not all childhood dreams come true, that some of them really do. You know, like I said, I cried during my rewatch of this movie because everything about it just feels so real. Like Gina Prince-Bythewood, when she was making this movie, made it clear that she was trying to make sort of like a black version of When Harry Met Sally, which you can definitely see in places, especially since the movie keeps fast-forwarding years at a time. But this film is so much more than a black version of When Harry Met Sally. It's a coming-of-age story. It's a story of lifelong lovers. It's a story about how one game can bring people together, but how it's still their responsibility to hold each other together. A lot of this film was also apparently autobiographical, and that definitely shows. Like I said, the film feels very real. Even if you've never experienced something quite like this, you know people who've gone through this. And you can really feel a woman's touch on this narrative. And it's not just because of the detailed focus that's given to Monica. I mean, an argument can be made that she is the main character, despite the fact that this is a love story. And it's not just the fact that a lot of the film is focused on highlighting her struggles as she's trying to prove herself to people who think that she can't play ball. Where you can really feel the woman's touch on this film is in how honest it is with its feelings. There's so many small moments in this film that just build up to such a grand sense of emotional weight. I mentioned so many of them during my synopsis of the movie, but there's so many smaller points that I didn't bring up. Like there's this one scene when Monica's sister Lena is braiding her hair, and the girls are just talking about the upcoming school dance, and Lena tells Monica that she got Monica a date with a college guy. And they go back and forth about it for a bit, but at the end of this scene, Monica asks Lena if she's ever been in love. And Lena says, yeah, I've been in love a few times. And Monica then says, did they ever love you back? And Lena says, yeah, they did when I left them. And it's just a funny moment between sisters, but you can tell that the reason Monica is asking this is because she is clearly in love with Quincy, and she doesn't know if he loves her back. And that small detail carries through to the end of the film during their final 1v1, when she's trying to see if he still loves her, if he is willing to break off this engagement, or if he is just going to toss her aside again like he did in college. But there's also so many other moments that show that Quincy does care. Like in that scene after the dance when they both reveal that they're going to USC. Just beforehand, Monica said that the entire time she was making out with that college guy, she was just thinking about how many offensive rebounds she scored during the last game. And Quincy tells her, 4. You scored 4. Because obviously he was there, and he was paying attention. He's always been there, and he's always paid attention to little details, like when he made that joke to her about Spalding, the basketball. It's just such a subtle indication. And that's what love is really all about. It's the little things that show people that you really care. The small details that seem meaningless, but in reality they carry a world of meaning to the people who have to experience them. And that's perfectly communicated through the acting in this film. Every single actor in this movie does an amazing job. Some performances are obviously stronger than others, but no one is doing a bad job. Everyone in this movie feels like they're just a real person going about their everyday life. This is a world that feels lived in. These are characters that feel like real people with real problems. And there's just so many moments of subtlety that communicate emotion without the use of dialogue. And I'm not just talking about facial expressions, I'm also talking about body language. There's a shot at the school dance where Monica very clearly feels uncomfortable in her situation on the date with this guy. And she sits hunched over at the table she's at with her legs spread, because that would make her feel more comfortable and less stressed. But then she realizes a few seconds later when a couple guys walk by that, oh, I'm wearing a dress, I should probably not have my legs spread out. It's just a small moment that communicates that nothing about the situation that she's in feels comfortable to her, including what she's wearing. Like, she does feel empowered and beautiful and noticed, but it doesn't feel right for her. It doesn't feel authentic to her. And the pacing in this film is so perfectly balanced. It's not too quick, it's not too slow, it moves at exactly the pace it needs to invest you in the narrative and have you digest information as you go, as well as helping you, the viewer, become invested more and more in this growing romance between these characters, which makes it hit all the harder when they split up at the end of the third quarter. And as a more observant viewer, I actually appreciated the amount of time I was given to sort of consume both the verbal and non-verbal information I was given in this film. The amount of breathing room that this film has allowed me the opportunity to think thoroughly through these characters, their motivations, their desires, and also dissect certain things about them that were not outright spoken in the film, but implied. And something that I found incredibly interesting as I was watching the film is that I'm fairly certain that to Monica, Quincy was everything. Like when they're kids and Quincy asks Monica to be his girlfriend, and they kiss for 5 seconds. I'm fairly certain that that was Monica's first kiss. Because right before they kiss, she asks him, oh, we're supposed to kiss? For how long? And if she had experience doing that, she probably wouldn't ask that question. And then later, near the end of the film, obviously when she challenges him to the 1v1, she says, I've been in love with you since we were 11 years old. So Quincy was her first kiss, her first love, and like I talked about earlier during the sex scene, he was probably the guy that took her virginity. So that would mean that Quincy was also the first guy that she ever slept with. And he also might be the only guy that she ever slept with. Because earlier in the film, when Monica's mother is writing her about the tomboy phase that she apparently never grew out of, Monica just replies, it's not a phase, I'm a lesbian. And obviously she just says that to annoy her mother, it's not true. But her saying that also probably implied that up until that point she didn't really date. Then obviously Quincy dumps her in college, and we fast forward 5 years later. Monica's in Spain, she meets up with Sidra, and Sidra asks, oh, how many of these Spanish men have you been with? And Monica says, I haven't been with any of them. They don't interest her. And obviously 5 years is a big gap, and she was only in Spain for 7 months. She could have had other boyfriends after Quincy dropped out of college. But I think it's just so interesting when you look at the trajectory of these characters, and you see that Quincy spent his youth being a player, that he was committed to Monica for a time. But just like in basketball, he dribbled around the court a few times. Meanwhile, Monica was always locked in and never let go of that ball, which is technically traveling, which is probably why she got so many violations throughout the film. Side note, whenever I play basketball, which is not often, by the way, people have to keep reminding me not to travel. Like, I am not good at dribbling, and sometimes I just forget that, oh, I'm supposed to bounce the ball as I go around the court. Like, I really need to get better at that. But metaphors aside, that's just something really interesting that I want to bring up. The fact that while Quincy, who Monica calls Big Head throughout the film, was being led around by his little head, Monica was always faithful, whether they were together or not. And that's really touching and also interesting because it's not verbally communicated in the film at all. You kind of just need to put together the pieces and assume that, but it makes perfect sense. And this is what I was talking about earlier before I went into the plot. There's so much about this film that you can just dig into and dissect. There's so many small details here and there. Like the little joke that Quincy's mom tells Monica's mom, saying that, oh yeah, the black people down the street became the black people next door. You know, that's obviously a reference to white flight. Or like the fact that when we meet Quincy's dad, he is upset with his son not for swearing, not for saying the word shit, but for saying the word can't, because of just how he's raising his son. Just so many little details about characters around the story. Or like the story that Monica tells her mother, where her mother was preparing dinner for like 4 hours, but apparently wires got crossed, and her dad brought home pizzas instead. And how that just sort of made Monica lose respect for her. Just so many details that communicate so many things about the characters in this movie. And there's also the namesake of the film itself, Love and Basketball. The title of the film actually appears in dialogue in the movie, which of course is amazing when characters say the name of the movie. But it's part of a phrase, and it's called back to at the end of the film. It's in the scene when Quincy and Monica play 1v1 strip basketball, and Monica tells Quincy, all is fair in love and basketball. And Quincy says the same thing to her at the end of the film when they have their rematch 1v1, and Quincy beats her. He says, all is fair in love and basketball. And obviously this is a reference to the famous phrase, all is fair in love and war, which is a saying that communicates that all things are justified in matters of combat or love. Like that it doesn't matter if you're fighting against a country, or if you're fighting against another man for a woman's affections. Both things are justified. And the implications here is that while they may follow the rules on the court, Quincy and Monica have never been fair when it comes to playing against each other or playing with each other. To them, anything goes. Honestly, I just feel like I'm rambling at this point, and you guys won't be able to tell this because I'm going to edit it down significantly, but I'm actually about to hit the 3rd hour of recording this video. So I'll leave it at this. Love and Basketball is an exceptionally special movie. It's not often that a film like this gets made, where it's not only a romance that feels authentic, with characters that have genuine chemistry, with small details that build upon themselves and communicate things about the characters. Meanwhile, all that is blended together perfectly with a seemingly unrelated sport. And it works so well, because the themes of love blend so perfectly with the innate fundamentals and competition of a basketball game. And doing something like splitting the film into game quarters to explore the timelines of these characters, it's so ingenious just seeing the game plan of the director play out. I would sincerely recommend that anyone who hasn't seen Love and Basketball take the time to watch this film, because this was truly a story that was worth being told. And if you feel like you have true love waiting for you out there, fight for it. Don't let it go. Don't wait for it to come back to you. Put in the work, because that final score is not going to shoot itself. And just like Monica racing against time to make one final play at Quincy 2 weeks before he's supposed to marry Kira, you have to make sure that when the last 2 minutes come up, that you race against that buzzer and you pray when you take your shot, it is not too late. So yeah, that's That was an exhausting 3 hours. Actually a record for me, by the way. But, yeah, that was my review of Love and Basketball. I hope you all enjoyed it. Please feel free to subscribe if you're feeling generous. You can also follow me on Instagram or Letterboxd if you want to hear more of my film takes. I hope all of you have a wonderful Valentine's Day, and I will see you later.